The world stood on a precipice. The year was 1939. The Great War had ended 2 decades prior. Its echoes still resonated. New horrors were brewing. Nationalism and economic despair poisoned Europe. The Treaty of Versailles sowed seeds of conflict. Germany became fertile ground for extremism. Adolf Hitler rose to prominence. Imperial Japan sought dominance over Asia. Their eyes fell upon Manchuria. The world watched as storm clouds gathered. A global economic depression fueled unrest. Millions were unemployed and desperate. Democracy began to crumble. The world was poised for another conflict. In Germany, Hitler's grip on power tightened. His National Socialist Party dismantled the Weimar Republic. The Reichstag fire provided a pretext for the Nazis to consolidate power. The Nazis established a totalitarian state, silencing dissent. Imperial Japan embarked on a path of aggression. Their invasion of Manchuria marked the beginning of their campaign in Asia. The stage was set for a catastrophic confrontation. The echoes of the Great War, a conflict that had claimed millions of lives just 2 decades prior, still resonated deeply within the collective memory of nations. The horrors of trench warfare, the mustard gas attacks that left soldiers gasping for air, the unimaginable casualties, these were not distant memories but open wounds. Yet despite the collective trauma, a dangerous amnesia seemed to be taking hold. The generation that had witnessed the horrors of the Great War firsthand was aging, their warnings about the perils of unchecked nationalism and militarism fading into the background. A new generation, one that had only known the relative peace and prosperity of the interwar years, struggled to grasp the magnitude of the threat emerging on the horizon. They had grown up amidst the ruins of a world shattered by conflict, their lives shaped by the economic hardship and political instability that followed. The world, weary from the last war and desperate to avoid another, clung to the hope that diplomacy and appeasement could avert disaster. But the forces of darkness were already on the move, their ambitions fueled by a toxic brew of nationalism, resentment, and a thirst for power. The world's response to the growing aggression of Germany and Japan was a patchwork of appeasement and inaction. Haunted by the spectre of another global conflict, many nations clung to the hope that diplomacy and concessions could satisfy the dictator's ambitions and avert another devastating war. The Munich Agreement of 1938, in which Britain and France ceded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia to Germany in exchange for Hitler's promise of peace, became a symbol of this flawed policy. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich proclaiming peace for our time, but his words rang hollow even then. Appeasement stemmed from a complex mix of factors. The trauma of the Great War, the desire to avoid another bloodbath, played a significant role. Economic woes and political instability further weakened the resolve of many nations. The horrors of modern warfare, amplified by new technologies like aerial bombardment, made the prospect of another war unfathomable. However, appeasement only emboldened Hitler. It confirmed his belief that the Western powers were weak and unwilling to confront him. Each unchallenged aggression fueled his ambition, bringing the world closer to the brink of catastrophe. Section 5. The Gathering Storm. While diplomats engaged in futile attempts at appeasement, the storm clouds of war gathered with increasing intensity. Hitler, emboldened by the lack of meaningful resistance, continued his relentless expansion. In March 1939, German troops marched into Prague, violating the Munich Agreement and extinguishing what remained of Czechoslovakia. The world finally began to grasp the true nature of the threat posed by Nazi Germany. The illusion of appeasement lay shattered, replaced by a growing sense of dread and inevitability. War, it seemed, was no longer a question of if, but when. Across the globe, Japan continued its brutal campaign of conquest in Asia. The League of Nations, its credibility already severely damaged by its failure to stop earlier acts of aggression, proved powerless to halt the Japanese war machine. The international order, established in the aftermath of the Great War, was crumbling. As tensions escalated, a frantic arms race ensued. Nations poured resources into bolstering their militaries, preparing for a conflict that seemed increasingly unavoidable. The world held its breath, bracing for the storm that was about to break. Section 6. A world embraced by shadows. The world watched in horror as the shadow of war enveloped Europe. On September 1st, 1939, German forces unleashed a Blitzkrieg upon Poland, crushing Polish resistance with terrifying speed and efficiency. 2 days later, Britain and France, finally recognizing the futility of appeasement, declared war on Germany. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, had begun. A global conflagration fueled by unchecked aggression, ideological fanaticism, and the bitter legacies of the past was about to engulf the world. The delicate balance of peace, painstakingly constructed in the aftermath of the Great War, lay shattered. The Nazi war machine, fueled by a twisted ideology of racial supremacy and territorial expansion, cut a swathe of destruction across Europe. Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium and France fell in rapid succession, victims of Germany's lightning warfare and ruthless efficiency. The world watched in disbelief as the Nazi juggernaut seemed unstoppable. The horrors of modern warfare, amplified by new technologies and a callous disregard for human life, were unleashed upon the world. Humanity was poised on the precipice of an abyss, staring into the face of unimaginable darkness. Section 7. Whispers of conflict. Whispers of conflict had long haunted the corridors of power. Diplomats and politicians, haunted by the memory of the Great War, struggled to navigate the treacherous currents of international relations. The League of Nations, formed in the aftermath of that devastating conflict, proved woefully inadequate in the face of resurgent nationalism and aggression. The world had watched with growing unease as Germany, under Hitler's iron grip, cast aside the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles. The rearmament of the Rhineland, the annexation of Austria, the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, each act of aggression chipped away at the fragile facade of peace. In the Far East, Imperial Japan, driven by militaristic ambitions and a belief in its own racial superiority, embarked on a brutal campaign of conquest. Their invasion of Manchuria in 1931 marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would spread throughout Asia. The world seemed paralyzed by a mixture of fear, apathy, and a naive belief that the horrors of the Great War would prevent another global conflict. But the seeds of war had already been sown, and the world was about to reap a bitter harvest. Section 8. The Seeds of Catastrophe. The seeds of catastrophe had been sown long before the first shots were fired. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to ensure lasting peace, instead fostered resentment and instability. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies. The global economic depression of the 1930s exacerbated these tensions. Millions found themselves unemployed and desperate, easy prey for the seductive promises of radical ideologies. Democracy, already fragile in many parts of the world, began to crumble under the weight of economic despair. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi Party exploited this climate of fear and uncertainty, promising a return to national greatness and blaming Jews and other minorities for the nation's woes. Their venomous ideology, rooted in racial purity and Aryan supremacy, resonated with a population desperate for a scapegoat. Across the globe, Imperial Japan, driven by a potent mix of nationalism, militarism and expansionist ambitions, sought to establish dominance over Asia. Their belief in their own racial superiority and their contempt for Western powers fueled their aggression. September 1st, 1939. Dawn broke over Europe, casting a pale light on a world about to be consumed by darkness. In Poland, the ominous drone of aircraft engines shattered the morning calm. German bombers, their wings bearing the sinister black cross of the Luftwaffe, soared across the border. The Blitzkrieg, Hitler's lightning war, had begun. German tanks smashed through Polish defences. Polish soldiers fought bravely but were overwhelmed. Within days, the Polish Air Force was decimated. The Polish army was systematically crushed. The world watched in horror as Poland was ruthlessly dismembered. Section 2. Terror in the East. As the Nazi war machine cut a swathe of destruction across Poland, a sinister and systematic campaign of terror was unleashed upon the conquered population. The SS, Hitler's elite guard, and their Gestapo secret police, acting with ruthless efficiency, began to implement the Nazis' twisted racial ideology. Jews, deemed by the Nazis to be an inferior race, became the primary targets of this persecution. Synagogues were burned, businesses looted and destroyed, and thousands of Jews were rounded up and herded into ghettos, overcrowded and unsanitary districts sealed off from the outside world. Polish intellectuals, artists, priests, and anyone deemed a threat to Nazi rule were also targeted for elimination. Mass arrests, torture, and executions became commonplace as the Nazis sought to crush any resistance and terrorize the population into submission. The horrors inflicted upon the Polish people were a chilling prelude to the genocide that would engulf Europe. The Nazis, driven by their twisted ideology and a callous disregard for human life, were creating a nightmare of unimaginable proportions, a testament to the depths of human depravity. Section 3. The Unthinkable Unveiled. As the Nazi grip on Poland tightened, whispers of unspeakable atrocities began to filter out from behind the veil of secrecy that shrouded the occupied territories. Rumors of mass killings, of extermination camps where Jews and other undesirables were being systematically murdered, circulated among the Allied intelligence agencies. At first, these reports were met with disbelief and skepticism. The sheer scale of the horrors being described seemed beyond comprehension, too monstrous to be true. But as the evidence mounted, as eyewitness accounts from escaped prisoners and horrified locals reached the outside world, the horrifying truth became impossible to ignore. The Nazis, with cold-blooded efficiency, had created a vast network of concentration camps and extermination camps across Poland and other occupied territories. These were not prisons in the traditional sense, but factories of death designed to eliminate entire populations with chilling efficiency. The names of these camps, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek, would forever be etched into the annals of history as symbols of human barbarity, a stark reminder of the depths of depravity to which mankind can sink. Section 4. Factories of Death. The trains arrived at the camps day and night, their cattle cars crammed with human cargo. Men, women and children, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, stumbled out onto the platforms, met by the barking dogs and rifle butts of the SS guards. For many, the selection process began immediately. The elderly, the infirm, pregnant women and young children were often separated from the rest and sent directly to the gas chambers, their deaths disguised as showers or disinfection. Those deemed fit for work were stripped of their possessions, their heads shaved and tattooed with numbers, their identities erased, transformed into mere cogs in the Nazi killing machine. They were housed in overcrowded barracks, plagued by disease, starvation and the constant threat of violence. The daily routine was a nightmare of backbreaking labor, starvation rations, and constant terror. Those who collapsed from exhaustion or illness were often shot or sent to the gas chambers. The stench of death, omnipresent, permeated every aspect of life in the camps. Section 5. A continent engulfed. While the horrors of the Holocaust unfolded in the East, the Nazi war machine continued its relentless advance across Europe. Denmark and Norway fell in rapid succession, their resources plundered to fuel the German war effort. In the West, The German Blitzkrieg smashed through the Low Countries, bypassing the Maginot Line and driving deep into France. The speed and ferocity of the German advance caught the Allied forces off guard, their defences crumbling under the weight of the onslaught. On June 14, 1940, German troops marched into Paris, the once proud capital of France falling without a fight. The fall of France sent shockwaves through the world. The Nazi juggernaut seemed unstoppable, their armies poised to conquer all of Europe. Britain, now standing alone against the Nazi menace, braced for invasion. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, his voice a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, rallied his nation, declaring, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." Section 6. The resistance flickers. Even in the darkest of times, the flame of resistance flickered. Across occupied Europe, ordinary men and women risking their lives for freedom formed underground resistance movements. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged German infrastructure, and provided aid to escaped prisoners of war and those fleeing Nazi persecution. In France, the resistance, a diverse coalition of patriots from all walks of life, waged a shadow war against the Nazi occupiers. They published underground newspapers, disseminated Allied propaganda, and carried out daring acts of sabotage, disrupting German supply lines and undermining morale. In Poland, the Home Army, loyal to the Polish government in exile, fought a desperate and often hopeless struggle against the Nazi occupiers. They staged uprisings, assassinated Nazi officials, and provided intelligence to the Allies. The resistance movements, though often outnumbered and outgunned, played a vital role in the fight against Nazi tyranny. They were a constant thorn in the side of the occupiers, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to bow to oppression. Section 7. The Battle of the Atlantic. As the war raged on land, a different kind of battle was being fought in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The Battle of the Atlantic, a protracted and brutal struggle for control of the vital sea lanes, pitted the German Navy's U-boats against the Allied convoys transporting desperately needed supplies to Britain. The German U-boats, operating in packs and employing sophisticated tactics, wreaked havoc on Allied shipping. Thousands of tons of vital supplies, from food and fuel to munitions and equipment, were sent to the bottom of the ocean, bringing Britain to the brink of starvation and defeat. The Battle of the Atlantic was a war of attrition, a relentless struggle against the elements and the unseen enemy lurking beneath the waves. Allied sailors faced constant danger, their ships vulnerable to torpedo attack at any moment. The outcome of the war hung in the balance, as the fate of Britain and perhaps the entire free world rested on the ability of the Allied navies to win the battle for control of the Atlantic. Section 8. The North African Campaign. In the scorching deserts of North Africa, another front in the global conflict ignited. The North African Campaign, a seesaw battle for control of the strategically vital Suez Canal, pitted the British and Commonwealth forces against the Afrika Korps, commanded by the legendary German general Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The campaign, fought across vast distances and under unforgiving conditions, was characterized by daring maneuvers, tank battles on an epic scale, and a constant struggle for supplies and reinforcements. Rommel, a brilliant tactician and charismatic leader, initially outmaneuvered and outfought his British opponents, pushing deep into Egypt and threatening to capture the Suez Canal. However, the tide began to turn in favour of the Allies with the arrival of fresh American troops and the appointment of General Bernard Montgomery, a shrewd and determined commander, to lead the British Eighth Army. The North African campaign, though a sideshow in the grand scheme of the war, had a significant impact on the course of the conflict. It provided the Western Allies with their first major victory against the Axis powers, boosting morale and paving the way for future offensives in Europe. The Eastern Front, a vast and unforgiving battleground, consumed millions of lives. The clash between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was a titanic struggle. Operation Barbarossa was the largest military operation in history. The initial German advance was swift and brutal. However, the Red Army fought back with ferocious determination. The Soviets waged a war of attrition, bleeding the Wehrmacht dry. The siege of Leningrad became a symbol of Soviet resilience. As the world plunged deeper into the abyss of war, a glimmer of hope emerged from a nation that had long sought to remain aloof from the conflict. The United States, its isolationist tendencies shaken by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was about to unleash its industrial might and military prowess on the side of the Allies. The attack on Pearl Harbor, a surprise air raid by Japanese carrier-based aircraft, galvanized the American people, transforming their initial reluctance to enter the war into a burning desire for vengeance. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, his voice trembling with emotion, addressed a joint session of Congress declaring, "Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy." The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With the declaration of war against Japan, the United States, the sleeping giant, was fully awake and about to unleash its industrial might and military power on the side of the Allies, forever altering the course of World War II. While the world focused on Europe, a nightmare was unfolding in Asia. Imperial Japan, driven by militarism and nationalism, carved a bloody path across the continent. Their ambition to establish a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere meant Japanese domination over Asia. Their campaign began with the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. The full-scale invasion of China in 1937 marked a reign of terror. Villages were razed, inhabitants massacred, women were systematically raped, prisoners of war were tortured and executed. The Japanese military, bound by Bushido, fought ferociously. The world largely ignored the atrocities in Asia. The shadow of the rising sun cast a long and dark shadow. Section 2, A Dragon Awakens. China, weakened by internal strife and political fragmentation, struggled to resist the Japanese onslaught. Their armies, outmatched and outgunned, fought bravely but were often forced to retreat. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of resistance burned bright. The Chinese Communist Party, led by the enigmatic Mao Zedong, saw in the Japanese invasion an opportunity to rally the masses and advance their own cause. They waged a guerrilla war against the Japanese, ambushing patrols, sabotaging infrastructure, and gradually eroding the enemy's morale. The nationalist government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, though often at odds with the communists, also mounted a determined resistance. They fought a series of costly battles against the Japanese, inflicting heavy casualties and slowing their advance. But it was a desperate struggle, a race against time to mobilize the nation and secure much-needed aid from abroad. The Chinese people, though subjected to unimaginable suffering, refused to be broken. They endured forced labor, starvation, and the constant threat of violence, their spirit of defiance a testament to the enduring strength of the human will. Section 3. The Rape of Nanking. In December 1937, Japanese forces captured the city of Nanking, then the capital of China. What followed was one of the most horrific episodes of the 20th century, a 6-week orgy of violence that shocked the world and left an indelible stain on Japan's honor. Japanese soldiers, drunk with victory and fueled by a toxic mix of racism and contempt, rampaged through the city, committing unspeakable atrocities against the civilian population. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and disarmed soldiers were brutally murdered. Men were used for bayonet practice, buried alive or doused with gasoline and set on fire. Women were subjected to mass rape, their bodies mutilated and left to rot in the streets. Children were not spared, their skulls smashed against walls or bayoneted to death. The city's streets ran red with blood, the air thick with the stench of death. The rape of Nanking, as it became known, was a calculated act of terror, designed to break the spirit of the Chinese people and cow them into submission. It was a crime against humanity, a testament to the depths of depravity to which mankind can sink when driven by hatred and unchecked aggression. Section 4. The March of Death. As the Japanese war machine rolled across Southeast Asia, another dark chapter in the annals of human cruelty unfolded. The Bataan Death March, a forced march of American and Filipino prisoners of war, stands as a stark reminder of the brutality inflicted by the Japanese military. In April 1942, after months of fierce fighting, American and Filipino forces on the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines were forced to surrender to the Japanese. What followed was a grueling 65-mile forced march under the scorching tropical sun, with little food, water, or medical attention. Those who faltered were beaten, bayoneted, or shot. Many died from exhaustion, dehydration, or disease. The Japanese guards, their humanity seemingly extinguished by the horrors of war, showed no mercy to their captives. They treated them with utter contempt, as if they were less than human. The Bataan Death March was not an isolated incident. Throughout the Pacific War, Japanese treatment of prisoners of war was characterized by systematic brutality. Prisoners were routinely tortured, starved, and forced to work as slave laborers. Many died from disease, malnutrition, or overwork. With the entry of the United States into the war, the tide began to turn against Japan. The American industrial giant, its vast resources mobilized for war, churned out ships, planes, and tanks at an astonishing rate. The United States Navy, its ranks swollen by new recruits eager to avenge Pearl Harbor, began to claw back control of the Pacific, island by island. The island hopping campaign, as it became known, was a brutal and costly affair. Each island, heavily fortified by the Japanese, had to be taken by force. American troops, often landing under intense enemy fire, faced fierce resistance. The Japanese, entrenched in caves and bunkers, fought with a tenacity bordering on fanaticism. Battles like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa became synonymous with ferocious fighting and heavy casualties. The Japanese, their backs against the wall, fought with a desperation born of the knowledge that defeat meant annihilation. They launched suicidal banzai charges, their bodies riddled with bullets, their cries of banzai echoing across the battlefields. The Pacific War was unlike any conflict the world had ever seen. It was a war fought across vast distances, in some of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The jungles of Southeast Asia, the coral atolls of the Pacific, the volcanic islands of Japan. These were the battlegrounds where millions fought and died. The heat, humidity, and disease were as deadly as any enemy. Malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever ravaged the ranks of both sides. The fighting was often hand-to-hand, brutal, and unforgiving. The Japanese, their Bushido code demanding that they fight to the death rather than surrender, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing Americans. They booby-trapped jungles, launched suicidal attacks, and fought with a ferocity that shocked even their most hardened opponents. The Americans, though initially caught off guard by the Japanese fighting spirit, eventually prevailed through a combination of superior firepower, logistics, and a grim determination to avenge Pearl Harbor and liberate the Pacific from Japanese tyranny. As the war turned decisively against Japan, a new and terrifying weapon appeared in the skies over the Pacific, the Kamikaze, a suicide pilot in a plane loaded with explosives, on a one-way mission to crash into an enemy ship. The Kamikaze, meaning divine wind, were a desperate measure, a reflection of Japan's dwindling options and their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Young men, often with minimal training, were given rudimentary flying lessons and then sent on their suicide missions. They were indoctrinated with the belief that they were fulfilling their patriotic duty, that their sacrifice would help to turn the tide of the war. The kamikaze attacks, though terrifyingly effective at first, did little to alter the course of the war. They were a sign of Japan's desperation, a last-ditch effort to stave off the inevitable. The Americans, though shaken by the kamikaze's willingness to die for their cause, continued their relentless advance towards the Japanese home islands. Section 8. Unbroken Spirit. Despite the horrors they endured, the prisoners of war held by the Japanese displayed remarkable resilience and courage. They clung to life, drawing strength from each other, their spirits unbroken by the brutality of their captors. They shared their meagre rations, cared for the sick and wounded, and found ways to boost each other's morale. Some risked their lives to escape, hoping to rejoin the fight or to get word of their plight back to the outside world. Others documented their experiences in secret diaries, determined that the world would know the truth about the horrors they had endured. Their stories, often told long after the war had ended, stand as a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be broken, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. They are a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure. Section 9. The Shadow of the Bomb. In July 1945, a new and terrifying weapon cast its shadow over the world, the atomic bomb. Developed in secrecy by the United States, the atomic bomb represented a quantum leap in destructive power, a weapon capable of unimaginable devastation. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion, equivalent to the force of 15,000 tons of TNT, instantly obliterated everything within a radius of 2 miles. Tens of thousands of people were vaporized in the blink of an eye. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The combined death toll from the two bombings is estimated at over 200,000 people. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain the only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. The decision to use the atomic bomb was a controversial one, debated by historians and ethicists ever since. Some argue that it was a necessary evil, that it saved countless lives by bringing the war to a swift end. Others contend that it was a morally reprehensible act, that it ushered in a new and terrifying era of nuclear proliferation. Section 10. Victory's Hollow Echo. On August 15, 1945, after 6 long years of war, Japan surrendered to the Allied powers. The most destructive conflict in human history was over. Victory, though hard-won and costly, brought with it a mix of relief and unease. The world rejoiced at the end of the nightmare, but the scars of war ran deep. Millions lay dead, their lives cut short by the senseless violence. Cities lay in ruins, their streets littered with rubble and the ghosts of the fallen. The war had reshaped the global order, leaving the United States and the Soviet Union as the world's two superpowers, locked in a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. The shadow of the atomic bomb, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for self-destruction, hung over the world, a chilling reminder of the fragility of peace. Yet even amidst the ruins, there was hope. December 7th, 1941. A date etched in history. A date that lived in infamy. The tranquil waters of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, were shattered by the roar of aircraft engines and the deafening explosions of bombs. Japanese carrier planes bearing the rising sun descended upon the unsuspecting US Pacific Fleet. Battleships, once symbols of American might, were transformed into fiery tombs. Sailors, caught off guard, scrambled to man their battle stations, their courage no match for the surprise attack. The sky rained fire and steel as torpedoes ripped through hulls and bombs ignited fuel stores. America, long hesitant to join the global conflict, was thrust into the maelstrom of war. The isolationist sentiment that had gripped the nation evaporated in the smoke-filled air of Pearl Harbor. The sleeping giant had been awakened, and its fury would be terrible to behold. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a gamble, a desperate attempt by Japan to cripple the US Pacific Fleet and buy themselves time to consolidate their gains in Southeast Asia. It was a gamble that backfired spectacularly, unifying the American people and unleashing the industrial and military might of the United States against the Axis powers. The shockwaves from Pearl Harbor reverberated across the United States. Outrage mingled with grief as news of the attack spread. Gone was the isolationist sentiment that had long divided the nation. In its place, a steely resolve emerged, a determination to avenge the fallen and defend freedom against the forces of tyranny. From coast to coast, Americans answered the call to arms. Young men, their faces etched with a mix of apprehension and determination, lined up at recruiting stations, eager to do their part. Factories, once humming with the production of consumer goods, were retooled to churn out tanks, planes, ships and munitions. The United States, with its vast industrial capacity and its seemingly inexhaustible supply of manpower, was transforming itself into the arsenal of democracy. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, his voice a beacon of strength and resolve, rallied the nation, declaring, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." America's entry into the war marked a turning point in the global conflict. The Axis powers, though initially confident in their ability to defeat a divided and hesitant United States, had awakened a sleeping giant, one that would stop at nothing to secure victory. The United States, under the leadership of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, embraced its new role as the arsenal of democracy. Factories, once producing consumer goods, were retooled for war production. Assembly lines, once churning out cars and refrigerators, now hummed with the construction of tanks, planes and ships. The American workforce, bolstered by women who stepped into traditionally male-dominated roles, toiled tirelessly to support the war effort. Rosie the Riveter, a cultural icon of the era, became a symbol of American women's contributions to the war effort. The United States, through the Lend-Lease Act, provided billions of dollars worth of aid to its allies, including Great Britain, the Soviet Union and China. Food, weapons, ammunition and other vital supplies flowed across the Atlantic and Pacific, bolstering the resistance against the Axis powers. The American industrial machine, fueled by the determination of its people and the ingenuity of its engineers and scientists, proved to be a decisive factor in the Allied victory. The sheer volume of war materials produced by the United States overwhelmed the Axis powers, tipping the balance of power in favor of the Allies. The North African Campaign, a back-and-forth struggle between the British and the Afrika Korps, led by the legendary German General Erwin Rommel, witnessed a turning point with the arrival of American forces. The Americans, eager to prove themselves in battle, brought with them fresh troops, tanks, and a determination to defeat Rommel's Desert Fox. The Second Battle of El Alamein, a decisive Allied victory, marked the beginning of the end for Rommel's Afrika Korps. The Americans, fighting alongside their British and Commonwealth allies, pushed the Germans and Italians back across North Africa, liberating key strategic locations. The North African Campaign, though a sideshow compared to the Eastern Front, provided the Western Allies with valuable combat experience and boosted morale. It also paved the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy, opening a new front in the war against the Axis powers. The defeat of the Axis forces in North Africa was a significant turning point in the war. It demonstrated the growing strength of the Allied forces and set the stage for future offensives in Europe. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa in November 1942, was a daring gamble, a strategic masterstroke that caught the Axis powers off guard. American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria aiming to seize control of key ports and airfields and open a new front against the Axis powers. The landings were met with a mix of resistance and confusion. French forces, loyal to the Vichy government, which collaborated with the Nazis, initially opposed the Allied landings. However, many French units switched sides, joining the Allies in their fight against the Germans and Italians. Operation Torch, though not without its challenges, was a strategic success. It secured Allied control of North Africa, provided a base for future operations against Italy, and boosted morale among the Allied nations. It also demonstrated the growing coordination and cooperation between the Western Allies. The success of Operation Torch paved the way for the eventual liberation of Europe. It was a crucial step in the Allied strategy of defeating the Axis powers on multiple fronts, weakening their ability to wage war. Hitler, obsessed with the idea of a fortress Europe, poured resources into fortifying the coastline of Western Europe. Concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and artillery emplacements dotted the beaches of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, creating a formidable barrier against a potential Allied invasion. The Atlantic Wall, as it was known, was a testament to German engineering and a symbol of Nazi determination to repel any Allied attempt to liberate Europe. The German High Command, confident in the strength of their defences, believed that any Allied invasion would be met with swift and decisive defeat. However, they underestimated the determination of the Allied forces and the ingenuity of their planners. The Allies, aware of the challenges they faced, spent months meticulously planning and preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in history. The stage was set for a clash of titans, a battle that would decide the fate of Europe and the outcome of the war. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history. Under a cloak of secrecy and a barrage of naval gunfire, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. American, British, Canadian and Free French troops, their faces grim, their resolve unwavering, fought their way ashore, facing a hail of German bullets and artillery fire. Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, Sword Beach, code names that would forever be etched in the annals of history, symbols of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of those who fought for freedom. The beaches, transformed into killing fields, were littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, their sacrifices paving the way for the liberation of Europe. Despite heavy casualties and fierce German resistance, the Allies secured a foothold on the beaches of Normandy. The liberation of Europe had begun. The D-Day landings were a testament to the courage and sacrifice of the Allied soldiers, the skill and determination of their commanders, and the unwavering support of the Allied nations. It was a turning point in the war, a decisive blow against the Nazi war machine and a beacon of hope for a world yearning for peace. Following the successful D-Day landings, Allied forces, spearheaded by American, British and Canadian troops, fought their way across the French countryside, liberating towns and cities from Nazi occupation. The French resistance, emboldened by the Allied advance, rose up against their oppressors, disrupting German supply lines and aiding the Allied advance. Paris, the City of Lights, was liberated in August 1944, a symbol of the crumbling Nazi grip on occupied Europe. General Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French, triumphantly marched down the Champs-Élysées, greeted by the cheers of ecstatic Parisians. The liberation of France was a joyous occasion, but it was not without its costs. Thousands of Allied soldiers, many of them Americans, made the ultimate sacrifice, their lives given in the name of freedom. The French people, who had endured years of Nazi occupation, welcomed their liberators with open arms, their gratitude mixed with the grief of their own losses. The liberation of France was a major turning point in the war, marking the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. It also solidified the bonds between the Western Allies, their shared sacrifices forging an unbreakable alliance. As Allied forces advanced towards the German border, Hitler launched a desperate counter-offensive in December 1944, hoping to split the Allied lines and regain the initiative. The Battle of the Bulge, so named for the bulge created in the American lines, was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States Army in World War II. American troops, caught off guard by the ferocity of the German attack, fought tenaciously in the Ardennes forest, their lines stretched thin, their supplies dwindling. The weather, with its freezing temperatures and heavy snow, added to the misery of the battle. Despite heavy casualties and initial setbacks, the American defense held. Reinforcements arrived, bolstered by the arrival of General George S. Patton's Third Army, which relieved the besieged city of Bastogne. The German offensive, though initially successful, ultimately failed, their resources depleted, their morale shattered. The Battle of the Bulge, a costly victory for the Allies, marked the last major German offensive on the Western Front. It also demonstrated the resilience and fighting spirit of the American soldier. Section 10. Closing in on the heart of darkness. With the failure of the Ardennes offensive, the war in Europe entered its final phase. Allied forces, their ranks bolstered by fresh troops and with overwhelming air superiority, pushed eastward, closing in on the heart of the crumbling Nazi empire. The Rhine River, once considered a formidable natural barrier, was crossed in March 1945, opening the way for the Allied advance into the German heartland. The Soviet army, advancing from the east, captured Berlin in a brutal battle that left the German capital in ruins. As Allied forces closed in, the horrors of the Nazi regime were revealed to the world. Concentration camps, liberated by advancing Allied troops, exposed the depths of Nazi barbarity. The world reeled in horror at the images of emaciated survivors, mass graves and gas chambers, a stark reminder of the human cost of unchecked hatred and tyranny. The end was near for the Third Reich. Its armies shattered, its cities in ruins, its leaders either dead or awaiting trial for their crimes. The world, weary from war but hopeful for a better future, prepared for the final act of the global conflict. Section 1. Island hopping, a brutal path to victory. The vast Pacific Ocean, once a serene expanse of blue, transformed into a battleground of unimaginable ferocity. The United States, its industrial might fully engaged, embarked on a grueling campaign to wrest control of the Pacific from the tenacious grip of Imperial Japan. This strategy, known as island hopping, involved capturing key islands, transforming them into staging grounds and air bases, and gradually pushing closer to the Japanese home islands. Each island, however, presented a unique and deadly challenge. Japanese forces entrenched in fortified bunkers and caves fought with a fanaticism born of desperation. They were prepared to die for their emperor, believing surrender to be a fate worse than death. The Americans, facing determined resistance and a relentless enemy, fought their way through jungles, across beaches, and up volcanic slopes, their courage tested at every turn. The cost of victory was staggering. Casualties mounted with each island captured, the human toll of war etched into the faces of weary soldiers and reflected in the grief of families back home. Yet the Americans pressed on, their determination fueled by a burning desire to avenge Pearl Harbor and liberate the Pacific from the tyranny of Imperial Japan. The Solomons, a crucible of courage. The Solomon Islands, a chain of volcanic islands cloaked in dense jungle. Guadalcanal witnessed some of the most brutal fighting of the Pacific War. American Marines faced a determined and well-entrenched enemy. The jungle became a battleground where stealth and cunning were crucial. Japanese snipers picked off American soldiers from hidden positions. Nighttime brought no respite, echoing with gunfire and screams. The battle for Guadalcanal raged for 6 long months. American forces, plagued by malaria and dwindling supplies, fought tenaciously. The sea, dubbed Iron Bottom Sound, became a testament to naval battles. The victory at Guadalcanal marked a turning point in the Pacific War. Section 3. Tarawa, a glimpse into hell. Tarawa Atoll, a tiny speck of coral in the vast Pacific, became a synonym for the horrors of amphibious warfare. In November 1943, American Marines stormed the heavily fortified island. The shallow reef proved to be a death trap, leaving them exposed to withering enemy fire. Those who made it ashore faced a determined enemy, entrenched in bunkers and pillboxes. The battle raged for 76 hours, a brutal struggle for every yard. Section 4. Iwo Jima, raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. Iwo Jima, a volcanic island just 750 miles from Japan, held strategic importance for both sides. For the Americans, it offered a base for fighter escorts to protect bombers on their missions over Japan. For the Japanese, it was a symbol of their determination to defend their homeland, a line in the sand they were prepared to defend to the death. In February 1945, American Marines landed on Iwo Jima, facing a well-entrenched enemy and a landscape that resembled a lunar landscape. The island, pockmarked with volcanic craters and caves, had been transformed into a fortress, its defences meticulously planned and constructed by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander. The battle for Iwo Jima was a brutal struggle, a fight for every inch of volcanic ash. Japanese soldiers, hidden in caves and tunnels, fought with a tenacity that belied their dwindling resources. American Marines, their courage tested time and again, responded with valor and determination, their flamethrowers and grenades illuminating the darkness of the caves. The iconic photograph of 6 Marines raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi, captured by Joe Rosenthal, became a symbol of American determination and the sacrifices made on Iwo Jima. Section 5. Okinawa, the last stand. Okinawa, a strategically vital island just 350 miles south of mainland Japan, became the site of the largest and bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. The battle for Okinawa, lasting from April to June 1945, involved hundreds of thousands of troops and resulted in horrific casualties on both sides. The Japanese, their backs against the wall, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They launched suicidal kamikaze attacks, their planes transformed into guided missiles aimed at American ships. On land, they fought tenaciously, their defences anchored by caves and tunnels, their resistance fueled by a determination to inflict as many casualties as possible. The American invasion force, consisting of Marines and Army soldiers, faced a determined enemy and a civilian population caught in the crossfire. The battle for Okinawa was characterized by brutal hand-to-hand combat, heavy artillery bombardments, and the constant threat of kamikaze attacks. The victory at Okinawa, though costly, secured a base for the planned invasion of Japan. However, the ferocity of the Japanese defense and the heavy casualties suffered by both sides cast a long shadow over the impending invasion, raising questions about the potential cost of victory. Section 6. The Shadow of the Bomb, a Fateful Decision. As the war in the Pacific raged on, a new and terrifying weapon cast its shadow over the world. The atomic bomb, developed in secrecy by the United States under the Manhattan Project, represented a quantum leap in destructive power, a weapon capable of unimaginable devastation. The decision to use the atomic bomb against Japan was a complex and controversial one, fraught with moral, political, and strategic considerations. President Harry S. Truman, who had assumed the presidency after Roosevelt's death in April 1945, faced a stark choice. Use the bomb in the hope of forcing a Japanese surrender and avoiding a costly invasion, or continue the conventional bombing campaign and risk prolonging the war and potentially sacrificing hundreds of thousands of American lives. The debate over the use of the atomic bomb continues to this day, a stark reminder of the ethical dilemmas posed by weapons of mass destruction. The decision to use the bomb, a decision made in the crucible of war, would have profound and lasting consequences for the world. Section 7. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a world changed forever. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, detonated with a force of 15,000 tons of TNT, instantly obliterating everything within a radius of 2 miles. Tens of thousands of people were vaporized in an instant, their shadows etched onto walls and streets by the blinding flash. The blast wave leveled buildings, ignited fires that raged for days, and left behind a landscape of unimaginable devastation. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The devastation, though less extensive than in Hiroshima due to Nagasaki's hilly terrain, was nonetheless horrific. The combined death toll from the 2 atomic bombings is estimated at over 200,000 people, many dying instantly from the blast and thermal radiation, others succumbing to radiation sickness in the weeks and months that followed. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain the only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. Section 8. Legacy of Fire, the Price of Peace. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked the end of World War II, but they also ushered in a new and terrifying era, the Atomic Age. The world, reeling from the devastation unleashed by these new weapons, grappled with the implications of this newfound power, a power capable of ending civilization as we knew it. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a complex one. The bombings, while ending the war and potentially saving lives in the long run, also raised profound moral and ethical questions about the use of such devastating weapons. The images of the mushroom cloud, the burned shadows of victims, and the stories of survivors became seared into the global consciousness, a chilling reminder of the human cost of conflict. The atomic bombings also had a profound impact on international relations, ushering in the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry and nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. The world lived under the shadow of nuclear annihilation, haunted by the knowledge that a single miscalculation could lead to global destruction. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a sobering reminder of the enduring power of the human spirit, both for good and for evil. The guns fell silent. A stunned silence descended across the globe. World War II was finally over. The world dared to hope for a brighter future. But the cost of victory had been staggering. The world was forever changed. The old order lay in ruins, replaced by a new balance of power. The United States emerged as a global superpower. The Soviet Union emerged as a rival power. The war left a collective trauma, yet amidst the ruins there were stories of incredible courage. The United States emerged from World War II a transformed nation. Gone was the isolationist sentiment that had long characterized its foreign policy. In its place stood a new sense of global responsibility, a recognition that the fate of the world was now inextricably linked to its own. The war had thrust America into a leadership role, a role it was initially hesitant to embrace but ultimately rose to meet. From the battlefields of Europe to the islands of the Pacific, American soldiers, sailors and airmen had fought with courage and determination, their sacrifices paving the way for victory. But the war had also unleashed America's industrial might, its factories churning out weapons and supplies that had tipped the balance of power in favor of the Allies. In the aftermath of the war, the United States, under the leadership of Presidents Truman and Eisenhower, embarked on a course of unprecedented global engagement. The Marshall Plan, a massive aid program, helped to rebuild war-torn Europe, laying the foundations for decades of peace and prosperity. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, a military alliance formed in 1949, committed the United States to the defense of Western Europe, deterring Soviet aggression and providing a bulwark against the spread of communism. Even as the world celebrated the end of World War II, the seeds of a new conflict were being sown. The wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union, forged in the crucible of a common enemy, began to unravel as ideological differences and mutual suspicions came to the fore. The Soviet Union, its territory expanded and its military might enhanced by the war, sought to consolidate its control over Eastern Europe, installing communist regimes and suppressing dissent. The United States, viewing Soviet expansionism as a threat to its own interests and those of the free world, responded with a policy of containment, seeking to limit the spread of communism through economic aid, military alliances and covert operations. The Cold War, as it became known, was a period of intense rivalry and suspicion between the two superpowers. It was a war fought not on traditional battlefields but in the shadows, a war of espionage, propaganda and proxy conflicts. The threat of nuclear annihilation hung over the world, casting a long shadow over every aspect of international relations. The echoes of World War II reverberate to this day, a stark reminder of the human capacity for both unimaginable cruelty and extraordinary compassion. The lessons learned from that conflict, lessons etched in blood and sacrifice, continue to shape our understanding of the world and our responsibility to prevent future atrocities. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, stands as a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked hatred, prejudice, and indifference. It is a stark reminder of the importance of tolerance, respect for human dignity, and the need to confront injustice wherever it may arise. The war also highlighted the importance of international cooperation and the rule of law. The United Nations, formed in the aftermath of the war, embodies this hope, providing a forum for nations to resolve their differences peacefully and to work together to address global challenges. The lessons of World War II are not merely historical artifacts, but enduring principles that must guide us in our quest for a more peaceful and just world. The world today, though far removed from World War II, is not without its challenges. Conflicts rage, fueled by poverty, inequality and intolerance. Yet amidst these challenges there is also hope. The world embraces diplomacy and cooperation to build a more just and equitable world. The quest for a better world is a journey each generation must